Dear brothers and sisters in Christ, dear friends in humanity, thank you for this opportunity to share with you my thoughts and worries about racism, xenophobia and migrations in Italy, a post-Catholic country. Italy is a country of ancient Christian and Catholic tradition, but now at a loss about its collective identity. From its birth as a unified state, 1861, has been characterized by migration, both external and internal, of millions of its citizens, and now, for several decades, also by the immigration of persons from the east and from the south, from lands beyond the Alps and beyond the Mediterranean Sea. Land and displacement, therefore, are two words that sum up well several essential traits of Italian identity, hence are two lenses through which we can examine the phenomenon of racism in a country that we can define as post-Catholic. Ties with the land, peasant culture, as well as the necessity of emigrating, the desire to be welcomed and the strain of welcoming, these characteristics are common both to Italians and to many of the peoples we visited in the course of WCC Pilgrimage of Justice and Peace, well beyond the obvious differences of culture, ethnos, and religion. From the beginning of the 20th century, the need of new land to cultivate and the need to emigrate have had grave repercussions in the rise of racial prejudice and racism. Soon after the unification of Italy, at the end of the 19th century, migration to the Americas, as well as seasonal migrations to neighboring European countries, occurred in homogeneous blocks of people from the same localities, allowing migrants to maintain very close ties among them, also in their countries of arrival. Italians abroad, like all immigrants, were often the victims of racist attitudes on the part of local people, above all because of the competing struggle for fundamental needs that are land, house, and work. With the rise of the Italian colonial ambitions in Eritrea and Somalia in the last decades of the 19th century, the problems connected with stable relations with the local populations take on progressively over more marked traits of racial hostility. The beginning of the fascist regime in Italy, 1922, the invasion and occupation of Ethiopia, 1928-36, the birth of Italian Eastern Africa, which included Somalia, and the consequent proclamation of the Italian Empire in 1936 transformed racial questions into open racism. In this crucial moment, the positively changed stance of the Catholic Church towards the fascist regime proved to be decisive. Thus, on July 15, 1938, a manifesto titled Fascism and the Problems of the Race was published with the apparent objective of furnishing a cultural justification to provisions that were to deal with the so-called colonial question. Today, reading even only the incipit of the manifesto standpoints makes one shudder. They show clearly that the racial laws against the Jewish would not be long in coming. I quote from this manifesto. 1. Human races exist. 2. Great races and small races exist. 3. The concept of race is a purely biological concept. 4. The population of today's Italy is in the majority of Aryan origin and its civilization is Aryan. 5. The contribution of immense masses of people in historical times is sheer legend. 6. Today there exists a pure Italian race. 7. It is time for Italians to proclaim themselves openly racist. 8. It is necessary to make a distinction between the Mediterranean people of Europe, Westerners, on one side, and Orientals and Africans on the other. 9. Jews do not belong to the Italian race. 10. The purely European physical and psychological characters of Italians must not be alterated in any way. End of quote. In view of the interlocutory attitude of the Catholic hierarchy, it is not surprising that it met with silence and acquiescence the passing of the infamous racial laws of November 1938, so 4 months after the manifesto, that show an unbridgeable abyss between fascism ideology and gospel teaching, or, more simply, Catholic morality. From that tragic date, the explicit refusal of racism on the part of the Catholic Church will be visible only in a minority of Catholic clergy and laity, ready to give witness, at times even at the cost of their lives, to the refusal of provisions that are so openly anti-evangelical and inhuman, and to do their utmost to help their Jewish fellow citizens. The dark night of humanity that Italy, Europe, and the entire world will know in the years of World War II had for its precursors that very lack of resolute opposition to and condemnation of the poisoned words of racism and anti-Semitism. The tragedy of World War II, the fall of the fascist regime, the 1946 popular referendum that brought the monarchy to an end, and the birth of the Italian Republic marked a decisive turnabout in the attitude towards explicit racism. The Constitution of the Italian Republic, 1st of January 1948, in its fundamental principles that cannot be amended, affirms: all citizens have equal social dignity and are equal before the law, without distinction of sex, race, language, religion, political opinions, personal and social conditions. The post-war revival and the reconstruction of an exhausted country saw the rapid shift from a predominantly agricultural economy to one ever more industrialized. This brought about a new massive wave of migration, both external and internal, from the south to the north of the country. In this way, Italian workers who emigrated abroad, principally in Europe, experienced xenophobic and racial prejudice from local populations, as well as legal and administrative discrimination. Prejudices and hostility also afflicted internal migrants, especially those coming from southern regions, called to work in the large factories of northern Italy. Difficulty in finding lodgings for rent, stereotypes and generalizations about organized crime, intolerance of traditional habits and customs. Decades of difficult integration were needed, but at the end of the 20th century, the larger aspects of xenophobia, that is, the fear of those considered different, receded more and more. For the last 2 decades, however, this damming of xenophobic prejudices and hostility has become blocked, and Italian society has come to see every day more and more a reappearance of the worst feelings of fear and hatred towards those who can be considered other. Xenophobia, which is quite different from racism and which means literally what it expresses, the fear of who is different or who is unknown, is becoming diffused and concerns of all of us. It is in fact xenophobia that dictates or at least conditions our behavior and first our thoughts in the presence of a traumatic event. Without vigilance at the rise of xenophobia, without a management of the phenomenon of migrations, the road towards racism is cleared of obstacles. Despite to some statistical data, today we can say that the markedly Catholic characteristic of the Italian population no longer exists, as it is clearly proved by the progressive lack of reference to the Church and to the Catholic social doctrine in people's life and their daily choices. Catholic lay people active in politics, especially through the Christian Democrat Party, who played a decisive role in the post-war rebirth and in the composition of the Constitution of the Italian Republic, have been afflicted by a loss of voice, due in part to the choice of the highest ranks of the Italian Catholic hierarchy of direct and constant participation in the political debate. The daily generosity of so many Catholics who are ready to collaborate with men and women of goodwill, of different or no religious affiliation, has become, in the eyes of the majority of the population, even of Catholic background, a manifestation of a personal fixation or sensibility. And all these comes from the Italian regions that historically were the most Catholic, those that probably induced many of the pastors themselves to fail in long-term perspectives. Those pastors mistakenly thought that the core of Catholic culture would resist the temptation of an even more widespread worldliness and the evaporation of a radical proclamation of what the gospel demands. Today, hence, the phenomenon of immigration has made evident an ever more marked dichotomy in Catholic circles and in Italian society, a daily confrontation between the so-called brand Catholics and Christians of the discipleship. The former tend to make a display of attachment to Catholic culture and are unconcerned of the complete incoherence of their behavior to the commandments of the gospel. Being Catholic is often reduced to wearing a brand that has little or nothing to do with Christianity. They conform to a worldly mentality and exploit religious symbols reduced to the level of fetishes. Emblematic in this respect is the secretary of a political party who until few years ago sang the praises of mythological river divinities, showed contempt for the population in the south and promoted the secession of northern Italy. Then, in recent electoral rallies for the Italian and European parliaments, this politician has systematically used a copy of the Gospels and a rosary to connect himself with Catholic identity, unconcerned that at the same time his supporters were deriding Pope Francis and the bishops of the Catholic Church and ignoring evangelical principle and pastoral norms. Once he became a minister in the national government, he has systematically impeded every practice of hospitality towards refugees and those who seek asylum, and through social media has orchestrated real campaigns of hatred against foreigners and against those who take care of them. He finally managed to get voted a law that condemns those who help castaways and severely limits the freedom of manifestation of dissent. And for this success, he dared to give public thanks to the Blessed Virgin. Episodes of xenophobic intolerance and violent acts of a clear fascist and racist stamp, thus, have multiplied enormously, perpetrated by marginal groups and radicalized fringes that, however, feel that enjoy the understanding and support of a good portion of the Italian population. Several Catholics of brand Catholicism agree with these choices and disclose on social media their intolerance towards refugees and migrants. On the other hand, Christians of the Disciples seek every day to conform their poor lives to that of Jesus Christ and to the demands of the Gospel. The pacific, obstinate resistance of these men and women, simple baptized of every age and social class, priests, religious, bishops, in spite of all their contradictions, keeps burning the flame of the Gospel in a country that, as a whole, may now be defined as post-Catholic. In this laborious search for daily commitment to the Gospel, many Christians are constantly brought back by the magisterium in words and acts of Pope Francis to of the essential of their faith, to remain firmly attached to the words of Jesus, to his work, and his telling the truth about the merciful Father. In this sense, facing of the civil degeneration of Italy, the Bishop of Rome has become a reference and a source of hope, even for many non-believers, men and women of goodwill, who obstinately defend the dignity of every human being. Thank you.